hands are turning blue.
Yeah, mine are too. Thanks.
They made us laugh in a room with peeling paint and bad coffee. But behind those weary desks and sarcastic smiles was a cast built not on stardom, but survival. Barney Miller wasn't glamorous. It wasn't slick. It was real, and the actors who brought that world to life paid the price for that truth in ways no script could ever capture. Some came to the show with broken dreams. Others with decades of rejection behind them. They played cops, but they were rebels, misfits, immigrants, veterans, outsiders in the television machine. And while the precinct doors closed in 1982, real life never gave them a neat ending. Some would die alone, some in silence. Some would never get the recognition they deserved until they were gone. And that's what makes this story worth telling. This isn't just nostalgia. It's a reckoning. A look back at what they gave and what it cost them. What really happened to the men and women of the 12th precinct. The one who died mid-season without finishing his goodbye. The one who was declared dead in print while still alive. The one who rewrote what it meant to be a black intellectual on TV. The one who couldn't outrun cancer or Hollywood's indifference. The ones we forgot. This is the story they didn't get to finish. And tonight, we're going to finish it for them. Don't let their stories fade like the credits they were buried under. Subscribe now, not just for nostalgia, but for truth. Because behind every sitcom smile was a life, and sometimes a silent scream. Because this channel isn't just about television history. It's about remembering the people behind the punchlines, before the world forgets them again. Abe Vigoda, Phil Fish. He looked like a man born tired. Sagging eyes, hunched shoulders, the eternal sigh of someone who had seen too much and expected even worse. That was Phil Fish, the most unlikely star of Barney Miller. And Abe Vigoda made him unforgettable. But behind that deadpan brilliance was an actor who waited decades for a moment. And then spent the rest of his life haunted by it. Abe was already in his 50s when the world finally noticed him. For over 20 years, he had scraped by on stage and in bit roles. Playing thugs, bartenders, anything that paid. Then came 1972, a casting call for a small role in a little gangster film called The Godfather. Vigoda auditioned with 500 other unknowns and landed the role of Salvatore Tessio, the traitor who begs for mercy with the quiet plea, for old time's sake. That one line changed everything. Then came Barney Miller. As Detective Phil Fish, Abe wasn't meant to be the breakout character. He was old. He was cranky. He looked like he belonged in retirement, not a sitcom. But audiences fell in love. They laughed at the hemorrhoid jokes, the bathroom runs, the never-ending complaints, but what they really connected with was the truth underneath it all. Fish was weary. Yes, but he was honest. Honest in a world of bluffers. He didn't posture. He endured. That honesty got him his own spin-off, Fish, where the detective retires and cares for a group of foster children. The show only lasted 2 seasons. And Vigoda? He never found another role that came close. What he did find, bizarrely, was death. Or rather, rumors of it. In 1982, a magazine mistakenly reported him as deceased. The joke stuck. For years, people thought Abe Vigoda had died. Late-night shows mocked it. Websites tracked it. Abe played along. Even posing in a coffin for laughs. But the gag cut deep. Because beneath the humor was a man still working, still alive, and still not seen for anything beyond what he used to be. He died for real in 2016, at the age of 94. In his sleep. Quietly, like a man who never wanted to make a fuss. Abe Vigoda was more than Fish. He was proof that sometimes the biggest laughs come from the quietest rooms. And the most enduring actors are the ones who never stop showing up, even when the world has already written their obituary. Jack Soo, Nick Yamana. Before he made you laugh with a deadpan stare and a cup of undrinkable coffee, he was Goro Suzuki, a name America didn't want to hear. A Japanese-American born in Oakland. Jack Soo's life was marked by silence, survival, and a quiet fight against invisibility. As a young man, he and his family were imprisoned in Japanese internment camps during World War II. He got out not by protest, but by enlisting in the U.S. Army, joining the legendary 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the most decorated unit in American military history. But when the war ended, the real battle began. Returning home, he wanted to be a singer, a comedian, a name. But America didn't want a Garo Suzuki on the marquee. So he changed it to Jack Soo, choosing a Chinese-sounding name because it was easier for clubs to stomach. He billed himself as the Chinese Bing Crosby, not out of pride, but necessity. On stage, he was smooth, funny, magnetic. Off stage, he was a Japanese-American man in a country that never stopped reminding him. His big break came with Flower Drum Song on Broadway, where he climbed from chorus to lead. From there, he landed a few film and TV roles, but always as the foreigner, never the man. Then came Barney Miller. At nearly 60, Jack Soo stepped into the role of Nick Yemina, and finally, he wasn't a stereotype. He was a full character, philosophical, bone-dry, understated, with terrible coffee and a better sense of irony than anyone else in the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. But cancer doesn't care about timing. In season 5, Jack was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. He kept filming until his body said no. His final words to co-star Hal Linden as he was wheeled into surgery? It must have been the coffee. That's how deeply the role had sunk into him. That's how much of himself he had poured into Yemina, quietly, gracefully, until the end. He died before the season finished. The cast broke the sitcom's rules to honor him, stepping out of character in a rare tribute episode. They played his best moments. They raised a mug. They said goodbye. Jack Soo wasn't just funny. He was a breakthrough, a man who refused to disappear, even when the industry tried to erase him. Ron Glass, Ron Harris. He was the sharp suit in a sea of rumpled coats. Detective Ron Harris didn't just solve crimes, he wrote about them. Quippy, stylish, and razor-smart. Harris was the intellectual heartbeat of Barney Miller. And Ron Glass, the man who played him, embodied that same cool precision off-screen. But behind the charm, behind the velvet voice and perfect posture, was a quiet struggle, the kind Hollywood rarely notices and even more rarely honors. Ron Glass was born in Indiana, not exactly the starting point for most black actors aiming to break into television. He studied drama and literature, earned a degree, and trained in theater before stepping into the ruthless world of TV casting. He didn't storm into stardom. He climbed, patiently, earning small parts on shows like Sanford and Son and Maude, until Barney Miller came calling. At 30, he took on the role of Harris, the only black detective in the squad room. But this wasn't a token character. Harris had depth. He wrote novels, wore tailored clothes, and spoke with bite. He was educated, complex, proud, and Ron played him with a balance that was rare for the time. He never begged for laughs. He earned them, and more importantly, he earned respect. Glass received an Emmy nomination in 1982, but never let it define him. After the show ended, he moved between television and film with quiet grace, never chasing celebrity. In 2002, a new generation discovered him as Shepard Book in Joss Whedon's Firefly, a preacher with a mysterious past and a moral steel core. His performance was subtle and haunting, proof that he had never lost his edge. Off-screen, Ron was a devout Buddhist. Private, grounded, no scandals, no meltdowns, just presence. It was that same centered energy that made Harris feel real, not a caricature, not a stereotype, but a man. Ron Glass died in 2016 from respiratory failure. No media circus, no spectacle, just a note of sorrow passing through the industry, quiet, like the man himself. He didn't shout to be heard. He didn't demand the spotlight. But every time he stepped on screen, people listened. Because Ron Glass didn't just play a detective. He played a revolution softly. Gregory Sierra, Chano Emmanuel. He was the fire in the room, unpredictable, passionate, and too real for television. Detective Chano Emmanuel didn't hide his feelings. He exploded with them. When he laughed, it was loud. When he cried, he didn't blink it away. And Gregory Sierra, the man behind that fire, burned just as bright and just as briefly in the world of Barney Miller. Born in Spanish Harlem, raised by an aunt after being abandoned by his parents, Sierra didn't come from opportunity. He came from survival. The streets were rough, the neighborhood unforgiving. For a while, he hovered at the edge of gang life. Then, on a whim, he followed a friend to an acting class and found his calling. Shakespeare, off-Broadway, New York theater, a Puerto Rican kid playing Macbeth. He once said, "I would have been happy doing that for the rest of my life. But Hollywood came knocking. Before Barney Miller, Sierra had already made waves as Julio on Sanford and Son, the frustrated, endlessly patient Puerto Rican neighbor of Red Fox's character. Audiences loved him. Casting directors saw potential. In 1975, he was cast as one of the original detectives in Barney Miller. His character, Chano, brought a rawness the show hadn't seen before, a cop who felt every arrest, who couldn't shake off the job at the end of the day. In one of the show's most powerful early episodes, Chano breaks down after killing 2 armed robbers in a hostage situation. The performance was gutting. It was Sierra at his finest. But by season 3, he was gone. He left quietly. Some say it was for creative differences. Others believe he wanted more than the limited space the show offered a Latino actor. He took the lead in AES Hudson Street, another Danny Arnold show, but it flopped after 5 episodes. He turned up later in Miami Vice, Soap, Hill Street Blues, even Star Trek, Deep Space Nine. He was always around, always magnetic, but never again the star. Sierra died in 2021 of stomach and liver cancer, mostly forgotten by an industry that never quite knew what to do with him. He was 83. No tributes aired. No retrospectives played. Just silence. But for those who remember Chano, that fierce, trembling voice of conscience in the squad room, Gregory Sierra was unforgettable. He didn't just act. He roared. And then, without warning, he was gone. Ron Kerry, Officer Carl Levitt. He was the little guy in the room, always standing on his toes, metaphorically and literally. Officer Carl Levitt wasn't the star of Barney Miller, but he wanted to be. He wanted that promotion, that respect, that seat at the table. And the man who played him, Ron Kerry, understood that hunger intimately. Because in many ways, Levitt wasn't just a character. He was Ron. Born Ronald Sicilia in Newark, New Jersey, Kerry came from a large Italian-American family and studied communications before trading it all for the stage. He was short, 5'4", and he played into it. On the New York stand-up circuit, he became known for his little man humor, sharp, self-deprecating, and grounded in the Catholic guilt and chaos of a working-class upbringing. He made audiences laugh, but he also made them feel the frustration of always being overlooked. His big break came in 1976, when he joined Barney Miller as Officer Carl Levitt, a patrolman with more ambition than talent, more eagerness than awareness. Levitt was constantly popping in with reports no one asked for. Trying too hard, standing too straight. But he wasn't a joke. Kerry gave him soul. You could see the longing behind the pushiness, the need to matter, the need to be seen, and audiences saw him. Over time, Levitt grew, not just in the writing, but in the affection fans had for him. He started as a background nuisance. He ended the series promoted, respected, and loved. The arc was subtle, but it was real, just like Kerry. Off-screen, he found work with Mel Brooks, playing oddballs and loudmouths in High Anxiety, History of the World, Part 1, and other comedies. But after Barney Miller ended, the spotlight faded. Kerry tried launching a sitcom of his own, Have Faith, but it lasted less than a season. He kept working, here and there, but the big roles never came. He died in 2007 from complications of a stroke. No headlines, no tributes, just a footnote. But fans of Barney Miller remember. They remember the guy who always wanted more, who never stopped trying, who made annoying feel deeply human. Ron Kerry may have stood in the background, but he made you look. And that's no small thing. Steve Lansberg, Arthur Dietrich. He didn't talk like a cop. He talked like a professor who accidentally wandered into a precinct and decided to stay. Detective Arthur Dietrich wasn't just smart. He was unsettlingly smart. He quoted obscure studies during arrests, diagnosed criminals like case studies, and delivered punchlines with a calm that made the room feel colder. And Steve Lansberg, the man behind the deadpan, was every bit as enigmatic off-screen as he was on it. Born in New York City, Lansberg began as a stand-up comedian, but not the kind who screamed or danced for laughs. His humor was cerebral, laced with irony, and sometimes so subtle that crowds didn't know whether to laugh or think. He wasn't a loud presence in Hollywood. He was a whisper that somehow traveled further than a shout. When he first appeared on Barney Miller, Lansberg was playing a con man. But just a few episodes later, he returned, this time as Dietrich, A character so unlike anyone else on television that he instantly stole every scene. He wasn't manic like Wojo or sarcastic like Yemena. He was calm. Too calm. He'd walk into chaos, analyze it, and walk out untouched, like he'd seen all of this before in a textbook no one else could read. Audiences loved him. Critics loved him. Emmy voters nominated him 3 times. And yet, Lansberg always seemed to stay just under the radar. He didn't chase the spotlight. He didn't give interviews. He never even told people his real age. For years, the public believed he was nearly a decade younger than he actually was. A deception born not from vanity, but fear. He once said that older comedians didn't get booked. So he rewrote his birth certificate in silence. After Barney Miller, Lansberg appeared here and there in comedies, voice roles, cult classics like Forgetting Sarah Marshall. But he never became a star. Not by Hollywood standards. He stayed quiet, even when cancer came. He never made his illness public. He died in 2010, and even then, some news outlets got his age wrong. He had erased himself so thoroughly that even in death, he was hard to pin down. But for fans of Barney Miller, Dietrich was unforgettable. He was the stillness in the storm, the brain in the room, the joke that made you pause, and then laugh 5 seconds later, harder than you expected. Steve Lansberg didn't need to be loud. He just needed one line. And he always delivered it better than anyone else. James Gregory, Inspector Frank Luger. He didn't knock. He barged in, unannounced, unfiltered, and almost always unwelcome. Inspector Frank Luger was the kind of boss who thought reminiscing about the good old days meant reliving the darkest parts of police history. He was loud, outdated, and proudly politically incorrect. And James Gregory played him with such gravel-voiced conviction that you couldn't help but laugh, even as you winced. Born and raised in the Bronx, Gregory wasn't some overnight success. He worked Wall Street as a runner after the 1929 crash, then clawed his way into acting the old-fashioned way, summer stock, traveling troops, church basements, and school gyms. He made his Broadway debut in 1939 and spent the next 2 decades perfecting his craft. Then came World War II. Gregory served in both the Navy and Marine Corps, fighting for 83 brutal days on Okinawa before returning to the stage with a deeper edge. By the time Barney Miller came around, Gregory was already a veteran of film and television. He had played scheming senators, military madmen, and hard-nosed cops in films like The Manchurian Candidate, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and countless TV procedurals. His voice, deep, rough, instantly recognizable, was a character in itself. As Luger, he brought that voice to a man hopelessly out of step with modern policing. Luger was a relic, a walking example of everything the NYPD wanted to leave behind. But Gregory gave him more than just bluster. He gave him sadness. Under the clueless nostalgia was a man who had outlived his partners, his pride, and his usefulness. He rambled not because he wanted attention, but because he had no one else to listen. Luger's appearances were brief, but they always hit. He was the annoying uncle you couldn't quite push away, because deep down, you knew his time had passed, and he was all too aware of it. Gregory stayed with Barney Miller until its final season, then quietly retired. No farewell tour, no scandal, just a man stepping away from the stage after 50 years of showing up. He died in 2002 at the age of 90 in Sedona, Arizona. No flash, no headlines, just peace. James Gregory wasn't a superstar. He was something rarer, a working actor with a signature presence, a man who could walk into a scene, say 3 words, and leave the room spinning. He didn't play the hero. He played the past, and he played it perfectly. Florence Stanley, Bernice Fish. She wasn't part of the squad room. She was the voice on the other end of the phone, the woman behind the nagging, the wife who never let Phil Fish forget he had a life beyond the badge, even if that life was full of complaints, aches, and arguments. Bernice Fish was barely on screen, but when she was, she made noise. And Florence Stanley made sure that noise mattered. Before Barney Miller, Stanley had built her name where so many greats begin and end the stage. A Broadway veteran with a voice like gravel and timing like a sniper, she didn't chase leading roles. She commanded the character parts, the sharp-tongued neighbor, the wisecracking aunt, the woman who knew too much and said it anyway. In a world where actresses often aged into invisibility, Florence Stanley aged into presence. She first appeared in Barney Miller as Bernice Fish, the eternally frustrated, eternally off-screen wife of Abe Vigoda's Detective Fish. Their marriage was comedy gold, two people bound not by romance, but by shared misery, routines, and grudging loyalty. When Fish, the spin-off series, launched in 1977, Stanley stepped fully into the spotlight as Bernice, giving the character a physical presence to match her already iconic tone. The show didn't last long, 2 seasons, but Stanley's portrayal stuck. After Fish, Stanley found a second wind in television. She voiced animated characters in Dinosaurs and Family Guy, played tough mothers and no-nonsense grandmas, and even directed episodes of My Two Dads. She wasn't a household name, but she was everywhere, in sitcoms, in films, in voice booths, always delivering that signature blend of sarcasm and warmth. Florence Stanley died in 2003 following a stroke. She was 79. Her death didn't spark national headlines, but in comedy circles, her loss was felt. She represented a type of performer we don't see much anymore. One who didn't need glamour, who didn't play pretty, who brought grit and weight to every line. As Bernice Fish, she was the woman who never let the audience or her husband off easy. And in real life, Florence Stanley was just as unforgettable. She may have stood behind the curtain of bigger characters, but she always made sure her voice carried. And it still does. Phil Leeds, guest star extraordinaire. You might not know his name, but you definitely knew his face. Those bulging eyes, that rubbery expression. The kind of grin that made you feel like something absurd was about to happen. Phil Leeds was the definition of a scene stealer. He didn't need more than a few lines. He just needed a few seconds. And in Barney Miller, he got plenty of them. Phil appeared in multiple episodes across the series, always playing someone just a little off-center, a petty criminal, an eccentric witness. A guy with a theory and no filter. He was the perfect guest star, quirky without trying, unforgettable without forcing it. The kind of actor who could turn a side character into the most memorable person in the room. Before Barney Miller, Leeds had carved out a niche in New York's comedy and theater scene. He started as a stand-up comic in the famed Borscht Belt circuit, sharing stages with the biggest names in the business. His delivery was fast, his timing flawless, and his look, well, no one looked like Phil Leeds. That helped. He wasn't just funny. He was instantly funny the moment he appeared. As television expanded in the 60s and 70s, Phil found his groove. He turned up in everything: dramas, sitcoms, talk shows, late-night bits. Always that same peculiar presence, unpredictable, wiry, hilarious. He had roles in Ghost, Ally McBeal, Roseanne, The Larry Sanders Show, and dozens more. Casting directors didn't call him when they needed a lead. They called him when they needed to wake up the room. His work on Barney Miller gave him the perfect platform. A show that thrived on eccentricity, built around one location and tight writing. Needed guest actors who could bring chaos without destroying the tone. Phil was that guy. He could play wild without ever going too far. He always hit his mark and made it weird in the best way. Phil Leeds passed away in 1998 from pneumonia, at age 82. His funeral wasn't televised. There were no retrospectives, but in writers' rooms and actor circles, he's still remembered as a master of the short, strange, unforgettable moment. He didn't need the spotlight. He just needed the door to open, and once it did, you couldn't take your eyes off him. George Murdoch, Lieutenant Ben Scanlon. He wasn't a crook, but he made the detectives sweat like one. Lieutenant Ben Scanlon didn't chase criminals. He chased other cops. Internal affairs. The Rat Squad. The guy no one wanted to see walk through the door. And George Murdoch played him with icy precision, a cold gleam in the eye, and just enough smugness to make your skin crawl. In a show full of lovable oddballs, Scanlon was different. He wasn't quirky. He was dangerous. Not because he had power, but because he enjoyed using it. George Murdoch was a chameleon. Born in Kansas, raised in the heartland, he didn't look like your typical Hollywood actor. He looked like your dentist, or your high school vice principal. That's what made him perfect for the roles he played. Men in authority, men with agendas, men you didn't quite trust. In Barney Miller, he appeared in 11 episodes as Lieutenant Scanlon, the internal affairs officer who relished making the 12th precinct squirm. He didn't just do his job. He poked at it. He used lie detectors. He manipulated suspects. He exploited tension. And yet, he never broke the rules. That's what made him such a perfect villain. He wasn't evil, he was efficient. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His power came from silence and paperwork, the most terrifying weapons of all. Murdoch's career stretched far beyond the squad room. He played doctors, priests, scientists, and bureaucrats across 5 decades of television. Star Trek fans knew him as the face of God in the final frontier. Battlestar Galactica fans remembered him as Dr. Salik. He showed up in The X-Files, Seinfeld, Night Gallery, The Twilight Zone. Always there, always watching. Off-screen, he was the opposite of the roles he played. Warm, kind, generous. But he never chased celebrity. He didn't need red carpets. He needed scripts, and he showed up every time. George Murdoch passed away in 2012 from cancer. He was 81. His death didn't make headlines. But for those who knew the face, who remembered the chill that ran down their spine when Scanlon walked into the room, it was the end of a presence. Not loud, not flashy, just unshakable. He was the kind of actor who made you uncomfortable for all the right reasons. And in a precinct full of laughs, George Murdoch reminded us, sometimes, the scariest people wear a badge too. They weren't matinee idols. They didn't have million-dollar trailers or magazine covers. What they had was presence, timing, soul, and for a few precious years, they gathered in a dimly lit squad room on Barney Miller and made television magic without ever raising their voices. Jack Soo, who cracked dry jokes through the pain of cancer. Abe Vigoda, who played old men until he actually became one. Ron Glass, whose elegance and intellect shattered stereotypes. Gregory Sierra, who carried fire until Hollywood burned him out. Kerry, the underdog who never stopped trying. Steve Lansberg, the enigma with 1,000 facts and one unforgettable stare. James Gregory, the relic from another time, reminding us what came before. Florence Stanley, the gravel-voiced conscience off-screen and on. Phil Leeds, the jester who only needed 10 seconds to steal a scene. George Murdoch, the interrogator who said more with silence than most did with monologues. They're gone now. Not with dramatic finales or golden tributes, but with quiet exits, some forgotten, some barely noticed. And yet, Barney Miller endures. Because of them. Because they made the background matter. Because they turned ordinary characters into timeless souls. This isn't just a roll call of the dead. It's a reminder that greatness doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes, it comes in the form of a tired detective sipping bad coffee, telling the truth in a room full of noise. If their stories moved you, then don't let them fade. Subscribe, share, keep their names alive. Because behind every great show are lives that deserve to be remembered.